Hi all. These are generally conversations between adults after the children have left the table. The language can be spicy and the subjects can get saucy. So if you're ready, this is the Southern Fork. Unscripted kitchen chats and also studio chats with some of the most interesting voices in the culinary South. I'm Stephanie Burt, a food and beverage writer based in Charleston, South Carolina, who travels with her fork to write for a variety of publications, from magazines you might have on your coffee table to the website you love to visit for your favorite recipes. And I'm inviting you to come behind the scenes with me to get to know the people who make this Southern culinary landscape so special. I'm always hungry for the next bite, thirsty for that next sip, and ready for the next conversation. Let's dig in. The Southern Fork is sponsored by Hansen Automotive Group in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. This year, many of us are relearning to cherish things closer to home, and that goes for any trips away from it as well. Enter the road trip, perfect for a weekend getaway, a camp out as the weather cools, or, if you're like me, dinner reservations. The Townsend Auto Group began 48 years ago with the late Charles Townsend, who started selling cars in his hometown of Memphis in the early 50s. Later, he and his family moved to Alabama, and in 1972, he purchased the local Ford dealership, and soon other dealerships followed. Today, this company is still built on service and connection with its customers, and they want to remind you of the joys of a jaunt down the road. The staff can get you into a new or pre-owned car, truck, or SUV you'll love to drive, of course, catching up on those Southern Fork podcasts as you go, and their service staff will keep you going. Townsend Automotive Group salutes local entrepreneurs, from restaurateurs to podcasters, and they welcome you to be a part of a community that does the same. Visit TownsendHonda.com, TownsendNissan.com, or TownsendAutomotiveDemopolis.com to learn more. Or, if you're in West Alabama, stop in at any of their 3 locations. Now, let's get cheesy, shall we? Christian Hansen's journey in cheesemaking started as a hobby while working for Dell in Austin, Texas. His instant passion for the craft was grounded in part by a sense of ancestral connection, because his grandfather and great-grandfather both operated creameries in Christian's native Denmark. In 2015, he left behind the corporate world to open Blue Ridge Creamery in Travelers Rest, South Carolina. His cheeses were pretty quickly some of the best being produced in the region, and his work has been featured in Men's Journal and Huffington Post Taste, and of course, on my table too on occasion. As an artisan, he has a unique point of view, but understands the classics too, and I'm excited to taste whatever he cooks up. Welcome to the Southern Fork, Christian.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm so excited that being able to record remotely on an app has really opened up the possibilities, and I've had such a hard time getting to Travelers Rest. I just can't seem to get there. I keep going to far-flung places like LA. So I've had your cheese many times and been impressed, and of course hung out, and we've shared some lovely adult beverages together. So I'm so happy. It's time to have a chat. So
we're both sober and we're not holding little plates at a festival.
How crazy is that? I know. Well, I first heard about you actually through Edible Upcountry. A few years ago, I was asked by the Edible communities to judge the best writing from all the different edibles, which is a small magazine, like a little franchise. And I read the article about you in that moment. I think it was called Cheese Whiz. Was that the name of it?
Yeah.
And it was one of the top contenders. And I love the writing, but I was very much enamored to learn more about your creamery. And over the years, I've not only learned more, I've actually gotten to know you and the cheese. But until I was researching for this podcast, I had no idea you worked at Dell. Can you tell us a little bit about the story of Peter Whiz during the day and Cheese Whiz on the weekends?
So most of my career, up until becoming the Cheese Whiz, was in sales. And so I was actually a stockbroker at one point in my life. And I was, as you mentioned, with Dell, living in Austin, Texas for 10 years, and worked in their small business group and their healthcare groups, and eventually made my way into field sales with a software company that they acquired. So most of my background, like I said, was in sales, and specifically IT sales. And it was in Austin that I started sort of dreaming about this notion of having a little, kind of call it a hippie farm in my mind. And the basic
that's
idea.
That's what I call it too.
Right. But I'd reached a point where I was getting frustrated with the corporate world and sort of wanted something a little bit more meaningful. And so I started playing with this idea of having a little farm where, if not being entirely self-sufficient, could at least pay for itself. And I would have, maybe a few pigs and some laying hens. And part of the dream involved goats for milking. And I started reading everything about goats and milking them and making cheese and looking at land prices. And at one point my wife said, do you think it maybe would be a good idea to actually try making a batch of cheese before you bought all these goats? And, which is hard to argue with. And so, I bought some cheese making books and some kits and started doing it at home. And by the second or third batch stuff, like, honestly, I remember thinking, this is what I really want to do. Really? And so luckily I got talked out of the idea of being a farmer because I'm much too lazy for that. That's a tough lifestyle. But I fell in love with cheese making, and about 5 years ago kind of took the leap, and here we are.
Your cheese is adventurous. I would say you do a lot of different styles. You like to kind of play. I would say if people aren't familiar with cheese, it's almost like you're one of those brewers that you have 2 or 3 defined styles, but you like to push yourself and really try new things. What was the first cheese that you made where you're like, legit?
I think it was actually probably like the second one that I did, which was actually a blue cheese that I don't make anymore because it's just too inconsistent. But it was enough. So it wasn't perfect, but it was like one of those batches that gave you just enough, kind of like people talk about playing golf. You hit one good shot in a round and it's just enough to kind of keep you coming back again. And so, I think I've had a little taste of those with the first several batches that I did, and I'm still trying to, dial it in and get consistent. But for me, that it was kind of that cathartic moment of like, holy shit. I just turned milk into 3-4 months later, something that, is delicious. And it looked admittedly a little scary.
I remember the first time I made ricotta in my kitchen. I was running around like I was Rocky. I'd had no idea. Like, my arms were up in the air. I was like, oh my gosh, look at this. It's so cool. Like, that chemistry process is so amazing. So I can't imagine how satisfying that must be once it ages 3 to 4 months. But where were you aging this stuff at the beginning?
So I bought a little, just like a used refrigerator that I kept out. We had a detached garage. And so I bought a used refrigerator that I kept out there. And refrigerators want to run colder than what cheese aging temperature, which should be like 55 or so, should be. And so the way that you make that work is you have an external thermostat that you plug your refrigerator into, and it's got a little probe that sits inside the refrigerator. So it basically tricks that refrigerator into running at a warmer temperature than it's otherwise designed to do. And so that's kind of the DIY cheese cave for beginners.
That is a pretty good hack. I imagine some people are going to be cleaning out some beer fridges this weekend after hearing this and going, honey, I'm making cheese. Move aside. And then you get to Traveler's Rest, which is a beautiful part of the country. And I think just the farmland is really great there. Tell us how you got hooked up with the Jersey cows and why they're important for cheese making.
Yes. So I live in Greenville. I'm probably only about 10 minutes from the creamery. And so the location that I found was really based in part on a combination of proximity to my house, the rent being something that I could afford, and then it also being a space that I could customize. So the creamery is really just like a 90 by 50 foot long metal building, and nothing beautiful to look at. But the advantage of it was that the inside was a blank canvas. So where I needed walls and where I wanted to remove walls was easy to do. But Traveler's Rest, as you mentioned, is this beautiful little town. It was kind of a dead town in a lot of ways up until about 15 years or so ago when the Swamp Rabbit Trail came in to Greenville. And that was like if you're not familiar with it, a rail to trail project that they did where they took all these old railroads and turn them into hike and bike trails. So that goes from I don't know how many miles south of Greenville now up into and just a little bit past Traveler's Rest. Mm-hmm. And the
one of the best ways to use our public funds. I'm sorry to interrupt,
exactly,
but I've enjoyed many rail to trail trails in my times and travels in the South. But yes,
yeah, definitely. Folks should visit Greenville if they have not. It's a very cool place. And then the second part of your question was, the Jersey cow milk. So, Jersey cows for the uninitiated are the little brown cows. Whereas the cows that most people sort of think about as being dairy cows are the black and white Holsteins. And while they both produce perfectly delicious milk, the difference between those smaller, Jersey cows is that the milk that they produce is higher in butterfat and higher in solids. So even though they produce a lot less milk per cow, the yield that we get from a gallon of that milk is higher than it would be from that Holstein milk.
And getcha. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's one of those things people don't think about, why is it that Europe has, hundreds, if not thousands of cheeses and what makes them all unique? And a lot of those traditions, will be like a cheese that is only made in this valley during this time of the year from this breed of cows, because that's just the way it's been forever and ever. But, all these different breeds of animals have properties to their milk that are unique and special. Mm-hmm. And then the same goes for, different animal milks. So sheep's milk and cow's milk, are very, very different, just as goat's milk is very different in how it sort of chemically works with cheese making. So all of those are little factors that kind of go into the traditions of why is it that there are more, goat's milk cheeses in the Loire Valley of France, and why did they have so much, sheep's milk cheeses in, Italy and in Spain. And, the answers to that, factor in things like geography and temperature. And, cows like moderate temperatures and lots of grass, whereas sheep and goats can graze on just about anything. So, just interesting to think about how all those.
It is. And to really think about that area around Traveler's Rest and the Greenville, the upstate of South Carolina, in a way being something kind of like a viticulture, if you would translate that idea of an AVA.
So glad you said
cheese, that. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So absolutely. So, the milk source is one of those variables that kind of goes into what makes the cheese that I make here unique, even from a cheese that, another local cheesemaker might make using the same milk. That extends into what are the yeasts and the bacteria that are naturally in the air, right here. So like you said, just with brewing, sour ales and, that sort of thing are very much shaped by what's in the environment around them. And so I very much hope to, find myself, or hope to, people recognize that we're trying to do something that not only is unique, but really truly can only be made right here.
Right, right. Now, you came at cheesemaking naturally, right? Didn't you come from a family of people who were in creameries?
Yeah. So I'm from Denmark originally, and, my grandfather worked most of his career in a, what you would call like a large co-op dairy. And so they mostly just processed milk from the local farms, pasteurized it, bottled it, and then, the sort of, side products from that, like butter and sour cream and so forth. But it wasn't ever anything that, interested me or we had conversations about. It wasn't until I started the creamery a few years ago, my mom says to me, I have this great picture of your great grandfather and his creamery. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, well, your great grandfather had his own place and he did make cheese, and which, I never knew. And so I've got this one great picture that I'll share with you. I think I've got it on my social media somewhere, but it's, probably from early 1900s, where you see this picture of, this creamery with a long shaft going across the room and these belts coming off of it that drive the pasteurizer and the homogenizer and, all those different pieces of equipment. So, if there's any truth to the notion of, milk being in my veins, I guess that's where it came from.
That's really cool. It makes sense because you really have to go down, I would say, a pretty serious rabbit hole to teach yourself this craft, Christian. So 5 years in of doing it as a job, what is like one of the biggest lessons that you've learned?
Oh God, that's a loaded question. Just from a straight business perspective is start with a lot of money. I started this very much DIY and, against the advice of any financial, advisor, I cashed out 401k to get this thing off the ground. And, it was all kind of, buddy labor and DIY. And I don't regret that because I wouldn't have gotten it off the ground any other way. But, just really thinking forward about how well capitalized you have to be, not only to get something off the ground, but to make it, get it to a point of sustainability. The other part is like you start making cheese and it's hard to write a business plan for something like that, because you don't know automatically who will buy it. You really don't know what the market is.
You're building a market as well as a business.
Exactly. Yeah. And then on the one hand, you're trying to make enough cheeses that there is a broad enough appeal to have a commercially viable audience. On the flip side, the more cheeses you start to do, the harder it becomes to make those consistently and to keep those in inventory consistently. And, that's one thing that I've frankly struggled with. I have, a blue cheese, for example, that folks, called Chattooga Blue that, folks have gotten really excited about in restaurants throughout the state. And, we'll just have a big run on it. And then a few months into it, you realize, oh shit, we're about to run out of stock on this. And then you kind of have to say, sorry, it's going to be another couple of months before we have it back. Mm-hmm. I think honestly, like we were talking about in Europe, some of these artisanal producers, they make 1 or 2 cheeses year in, year out. That's all that they do. And would that be smarter for me to do as well? Probably. But the answer there is that, I got into this really as a passion project and because it's something that excites me. So the thought of making just one thing every day, hell, I might as well be in computer sales and making a lot more money if that was the goal.
Right, right. Do you have a favorite part of the process?
I don't know that there's necessarily, one favorite part of it. But it's funny because people think of like the process as kind of being the day that the milk goes into the vat and we separate curds and whey and press it into a wheel. The truth is that the process can, depending on the type of cheese it is, can extend for months or even years, where, after day one, it's going in a brine to absorb salts. And then, after we get it out of that brine, we're allowing it to dry. And then we move to the cave and that, starts the aging process or affinage. And, that process is months of, depending on, again, what we want the final product to look like, either, brushing that cheese to knock off the excess mold. We might be washing it with a brine if we want to develop a moist, like a washed rind type cheese.
Mm-hmm. Or even a beer.
Or even a beer. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
That's something that we play with a lot. So, I mean, I think if there is one thing that I not so much a step in the process, but just things that I enjoy doing, it's some of those sort of experimental batches where we might take one of our standard cheeses and either soak those curds in a local sour beer, like we recently did with a brewer up here called Eighth State Brewing that makes these amazing sour ales. We've done cheeses with coffee and cocoa. And not with the idea of it being like an overwhelmingly in your face coffee cheese, but just something that has like these, nuanced layers of flavor to it that otherwise get with just milk.
And that's going to lead me to, do you have a favorite child?
A favorite
Something
child
that you're the most proud of, that you feel like is kind of the most consistent, or like that was kind of hard to do. I know I feel that way as a creative. Sometimes certain articles will be favorites because of the research that went into them or the publication that they go into. It's just different factors.
Yeah. I think the answer to that is probably my migration, which, is a little washed rind cheese. So for those who don't know, washed rind cheeses are the stinky family of cheeses, and they usually have an orange or reddish kind of rind to it. Like you think, you see like a Limburger or, that yeast is something called Brevibacterium linens, and, you sort of cultivate it by either washing it with a light brine or with beer. The Trappist monks, who didn't eat meat for the most part, developed this style of cheese because, cheese was their primary protein, and they also made beer. And I'm guessing at some point, one of the monks got drunk and spilled some beer on the cheese, and, and a style was born. But that to me is the type of cheese that I just personally, I think, get off on the most. They're stinky, they're funky, and you can tweak the variables a lot. And then they're also a quicker aged cheese. So, within 2 or 3 weeks, you sort of have a finished product to make decisions off of. Whereas some of our other cheeses, it'll take 2 to 4 months before I know, this needs more salt, and let me go back to the drawing board and start over.
Right. Oh my goodness. Yes. Yes. That's a long game and a different level for sure. Now, when you started selling your cheeses, did you start to sell that retail and wholesale to restaurants? What was the first part that kind of took off? Because I would say your cheese is regionally recognizable now. So what was kind of the catalyst for that to happen?
So the first couple of months that I was in business, I was really just doing local farmers markets and selling, the fresh cheeses that I could make right away. And, keeping in mind, you open the doors and you don't have a product to sell yet. So, it was, a few months of just doing the farmers market and then slowly building up just enough inventory. The sort of catalyst, I think there were 2 restaurants when I had first moved to Greenville, the Anchorage and American Grocery, which are 2 great restaurants. American Grocery is no more, unfortunately, but they were sort of the 2 that I really viewed as sort of the flagship restaurants at that point, and thought, man, if I could get my cheeses on their menus, like that would be amazing. And luckily I did. Greg McPhee at the Anchorage kind of embraced us pretty early on. Having my cheese on his menu was something that resulted in like 2 things. People would show up at farmers markets and say, "Hey, do you have Joe Cassie Tome today?" And I'd say, like, how do you even know that that's a thing? And they're like, "Oh, we had it at the Anchorage." And then the sort of social media version of it, we might get tagged on a post from them or another, quality restaurant. And then I would get sort of unsolicited, contacts from other restaurants, and it's like, hey, if it's good enough for Greg, then I'd like to try it.
It's super exciting when that happens.
It's so exciting. Yeah. And absolutely necessary too, because, starting out, and even today, I mean, I have no marketing budget. I've never done any advertising. If you've heard of Blue Ridge Creamery outside of Travelers Rest, South Carolina, then it's either because of word of mouth or social media, honestly.
Or me.
Or you.
As of today. So COVID, here we go. We try not to have all COVID content all the time here at the Southern Fork, but I'm sure with the restaurants being the driver of your business and the driver of a lot of your marketing, you've had to do the dreaded pivot there, Christian, and
yes.
probably are looking forward to cooler temperatures. So people are wanting to cook more and maybe give. I mean, is cheese a viable gift, do you think? People give them as gifts?
Absolutely. So it's going to be a huge focus for us this year, honestly, because COVID, in the last 30 days, I've had to have conversations about whether I can really honestly keep the doors open here, right? And the answer is I will. But if you asked me to sit down and put together a spreadsheet that showed you how I was going to move forward another 30 dadays, I wouldn't have been able to do it. So when COVID first kind of hit back in March, January and February had already been, and they always are, they're slow months. So people are trying to stick to their New Year's resolutions and not eat so much. And it's restaurant week where restaurants are typically using lower priced ingredients. So that's always a slow start to the year. And then COVID kicked in, and it was like overnight, all of our restaurant business was just entirely cut off. And I don't say that like exaggerating at all. It was literally just like the lights got turned out. And then the second piece of it is the farmers markets, which are close to half of my revenue for the year, were starting, so they started a month late up here. And then when they did open, it was at reduced capacity. So we've been doing like 20 to 25% of, that the half of our business, which is in farmers markets for the year. We've been doing about 20 to 25% of that. And, unfortunately, it just came at a time of year that you kind of can't recoup. The restaurants are slowly starting to come back now. The pivot piece of it that you alluded to is, having to do so much more retail wrapped cheese. In an ideal world for me, I'm selling 5 and 10 pound wheels to chefs directly. What we've had to do, and luckily been fortunate to have a demand for, is just doing, the 6 to 7 ounce retail cut pieces, which requires cutting, labeling, wrapping, putting a best by date. It doesn't sound maybe, when you first hear it like that much more work, but it's a fundamental difference in, whether you're sending out like whole wheels or bits and bytes.
Right.
But it's kept the lights on, right? So, local retailers, even some restaurants that have some, to-go cases have been supporting us. So, that's what's kind of been keeping the lights on. And, and then I'll tell you too, right after this all happened, I had posted on Instagram kind of about the situation and where we were. And one of the things I said was, hey folks, if you want to help us right now, the best way to do it is to buy gift cards, because even though we're not selling anything right now, the farmer's milk keeps coming every week. And if I don't pay them, they go out of business. So I mentioned having a local, Jersey cow farm, Southern Oaks jerseys. We also get milk from Tennessee, sheep's milk from Tennessee. And I'm one of only 2 customers for that farmer. And so if I had quit buying, they would have put him under. So it was a tremendous amount of stress for me. But long story short, what ended up happening was we had a huge output, a huge swelling of support. And so like back in the end of March, we did more gift card sales than we ever had. I also had a local retiree who reached out and said, love what you guys do, and I hate to see the jam that you're in. What can we do to help? And, out of the blue offered a $25,000 line of credit.
Wow. That gave me a little chill.
Yeah. And so I've had actually 2 of those type experiences. I get teared up talking about it right now. Another local lady helped me out just recently. And, so it does give you as ugly as a lot of things have gotten in America of late. It is a great reminder that there are really good people out there who, want to help out and, are excited to see what you're doing. So that's definitely validating.
And your work is so creative. Are you able to ship outside of the state yet? Or,
Yeah.
since I'm in South Carolina, I just get it delivered.
Yeah. So we have shipped, I think just about in every state, except for Hawaii and Alaska. Starting in the near future here, I am going to limit it to more like southeast, or basically everything east of the Mississippi, because especially post COVID, a lot of the logistics for the Postal Service and UPS have just kind of gotten so jacked up that even if I do overnight shipping, they miss one day. And if that's a Friday, it means that it doesn't get there till Monday. So long story short, if you're east of the Mississippi, go to blueridgecreamery.net and, we can ship it anywhere.
Well, you've kept the lights on, and, you're still making cheese, still buying milk.
Yes.
What are you hungry for? What's next?
For me, one of the most meaningful things to come out of this venture is the connections that I've made. I worked, as we talked about, in sales for so long, and worked with a lot of, perfectly fine people, but they weren't necessarily people who, outside of, the business aspect of it, I would necessarily want to spend my free time with. And having gotten into, this world of food and beverage, I feel like I've truly, as corny as it sounds, have found my tribe of people that are excited about what I make, and I gush and, admire the things that they do. And, some of these are, amazing chefs that you've had on, that, brewers, winemakers. So that's been the most pivotal thing, is just, kind of continue to make those connections.
Mm-hmm. Now, I would guess that there's an aspect of your personality that really meshes like a puzzle piece with an aspect of this job that you've created for yourself. What is that aspect?
I think it's the creativity piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a very left brain type of thinker. I'm ADD as hell, as listeners might already have picked up on in listening to off-tangent answers.
That makes two of us. So they're just like, oh my goodness. Right. Yeah.
So, just sort of being able to, do creative stuff. This will sound funny, but like I've done, for a boucherie back in January. I had an entire cow's udder that we made like a chorizo out of, and then stuffed with basically a chorizo made from the tissue from the cow's udder, stuffed it with that and melted cheese, and then hung the thing up over a fire so that we had, cheese and chorizo coming out of a cow's teats. Now that's going to sound gross and weird to some people.
Maybe even me.
Maybe even you. It's on social media if you hunt long enough. But, so doing stuff like that. And I will say for that one too, as weird as that sounds and probably looked to a lot of people, to me, it was sort of like not only a fun creative thing to do, but a way to really honor the life of a dairy cow who, once they're done with that purpose of producing milk, still have, all kinds of, useful bits and pieces, whether it's, the traditional cuts of meat.
That nose to tail stuff that I'm always spouting about. That really matters. Yes. It's about honoring the whole animal. Yes.
And that cow's udder, it's like an 80 to 100 pounds of tissue. And I say tissue because it's not quite meat. It's spongy and kind of unlike anything else on any animal that I've ever seen. But it can be made delicious. And, for us to not utilize something like that, I think is irresponsible. So, that was one of the things that I kind of geeked out on doing, even if it meant, getting some strange looks.
Well, what keeps you up at night?
Oh, keeping the lights on at night.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I think it's just the business more than anything else. And, just trying to put myself in a position where, I can keep doing this. Last summer, we had about 7 part-time employees throughout the year. This year it was me and one guy with, doing about a day and a half, doing more production than we did last year. So I've been burning it, from both ends for sure. But I wouldn't know what else to do. And I think that's the motivator for me and probably everyone else who COVID has, bent over, these last couple of months. in one way, it is kind of an affirmation that no matter what happens, the notion of going back to that corporate sales world is enough of a motivator for me to just keep moving, even if I can't tell you how I'm going to do it.
Well, I'm going to give you a break. I've got a few special powers that I bring out for the Southern Fork, as in a remote app, and I have a magic picnic basket. And
What?
I know, right? Nobody ever seems surprised at this, but I guess everyone's used to that now. But I can time travel with it, so I can go back and source anything that you want. I can conscript any chef to make a particular meal, or family member from your past, present, or even future to make you something, and bring you a dream meal. And it doesn't have to be perfectly coursed and paired, but I'd love to bring you some of your favorite things. What's going to be in that basket?
So my ultimate meal, again, being from Denmark, is we have a sort of meal like in the smorgasbord. I think is the Swedish version that most people are sort of or word that most Americans would be more familiar with. So we typically do it, especially around the holidays, and it's sort of an all day meal that is multi course. So it starts with cold pickled fish. Danes, we love our herring. And so you might have, depending on how many families, throw down on this meal, you might have 6 to 10 or 12 different types of herring. And then the next course is cold meats. So different types of cold cuts and sausages. And then there'll be warm meats, and there'll be, warm fish. And then there's a cheese dish. And the whole time, we're drinking, it's always beer and aquavit. And aquavit, of course, is kind of like our version of vodka, but they're usually caraway, flavored.
I'm super down with aquavit. I love the caraway. Yeah. I'm a grandma when it comes to that flavoring. Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, like it's very humble food. I mean, most of Danish food, like, I think most Scandinavian or Nordic food in general is like, it's humble peasant foods. It's lots of potatoes. It's fermented fish. None of this is fancy stuff, but it's all made with a lot of love. And, it's a very social meal. When I invite American friends to eat with us, I'm like, you guys have to be, go into it with the understanding of like, we're going to be sitting and eating for like 5 hours. This isn't like sit down and then we go up and, get up and watch the game or whatever. Like the sitting and eating is the event. So, that to me is like the ultimate communal meal. If you don't love herring, you might have a hard time at one of these things.
Oh, I'm there. Anytime somebody invites me to a meal that is the event and lasts forever.
Yeah.
It's going to be hard to get me up from the table. So on that note, if people want to learn more about Christian and Blue Ridge Creamery, you can go to thesouthernfork.com. As always, I'm going to have links there so you can see the face behind the voice. And Christian has some of the best glasses in the business. I wish she could help me pick out a new pair because mine suck. But you will also see some links there so you can learn more about the cheese. And if you like what you hear, I hope that this episode has really shown you really the passion and the building of relationships that happen in the world of Southern food. I learned about Christian. Oh my goodness. Must have been 4 years ago or 3 or 4 years ago now. And we've gotten to know each other. I've had the opportunity to taste, some of his amazing work, and, it has led to this. So I work really hard to curate very specific experiences for my listeners, Christian, and I'm so happy that it finally worked out for us to chat today.
I know, me too. Thank you. I appreciate being on and chatting with you, and look forward to drinking cocktails in person again soon.
I know. And of course, eating some of that Jokasi cheese that you make. I love that cheese. So thanks so much for coming, and we'll talk to you soon.
Cheers.
Hello, and welcome to Talking with My Mouthful. After chatting with Christian, I really began to connect the dots that for many of the people that I've chatted with in 2020, pivoting to having online sales has really helped. That was really just a game changer for Graft, who I chatted with, the wine shop with two sommeliers this season, Miles and Femi. Also, Life Raft Treat just joined Goldbelly, and then Christian having his online store. So I'm excited to think about this as an opportunity that maybe some smaller producers wouldn't have taken before 2020. But I think it's a trend. I think that's here to stay. And so as you're shopping online, and let's be real, we all shop online, whether it's for exercise equipment or groceries or anything else. Please keep in mind the small producers and be willing to look for those too, because the money goes directly into their coffers, which they need so much right now. But these small producers really can deliver on some very, very unique goods for you as we move into holiday season, where we're going to be eating some different and heavier stuff after all those summer salads. So anyway, thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Till then.
You've been listening to The Southern Fork. I can't wait to bring you more culinary conversations, but in the meantime, I have one question. Are you gonna eat all that?